In this video, there's a short discussion between myself and Jadrian Wooten. We co-host the Economics Happy Hour podcast on the principal agent problem. I think you'll like this short discussion, but if you want more, check out the link in the description for the full episode from the podcast and subscribe to either this channel or the Economics Happy Hour podcast for more economics content. It's important. And we're going to talk about the principal agent problem. Do you teach the principal agent problem? I guess I'll ask that first.
Okay. I don't. I think, I'll be honest, I probably should, because it is such a, these sorts of market failures are so common that I really probably should. And I just don't. I think it's just one of those, I choose other topics instead.
Yeah. And you mentioned market failure. Gosh, I think it's probably a bigger government failure than a market failure in terms of the principal agent. Like, government agents are supposed to be looking out for your interest. Well, first, before we get into that, so principal agent problem, there's a number of ways you could define it. But the principal is when thinking in an employment relationship, the principal is the one who would be hiring an agent to act on their behalf. So the agent is supposed to be acting on their behalf. The quick Google definition, the principal agent problem is a conflict in priorities between the owner of an asset and the person to whom control of the asset has been delegated.
So, for example, like let's give a couple examples. We'll talk. Matt and I are saving. I'm gonna try to give other examples because we're saving one that we want to talk about that is timely. Let's go with your business example. You own a restaurant. You put a manager in charge of your restaurant. The principal is the owner of the restaurant. The agent is the manager, and the hopes are that the person you put in charge is going to represent you and your interests. However, that person might not. The manager might do what's best for themselves and not what's best for the business. Or maybe like a lawyer, for example, would hope be representing you and trying to get you the best outcome possible, but maybe they're just trying to churn through clients. And so your wishes don't always match with the person that you've hired to represent you.
Yeah, and I'll go to the restaurant because I think we can all understand restaurants. I will argue that the interests will always not match, and that's part of the problem. And they won't match in terms of, and some of it, it sounds harsh, right? Like, so an owner is hiring a manager and expects the manager to do what's best but something as simple as, okay, if there's an extra 10 or 15 minutes, the manager could go around and, ask customers if they've had a good visit and get some feedback, or, chit chat with the staff. And just, if you're a manager, treating your staff well is a big deal, and trying to make sure everything's going okay. Or you could sit and take a break, or, you could scroll through your texts or something. Or if let's take it down a level. There's a manager and, let's say hiring an entry-level person at a fast food restaurant. Well, they can't give 24/7 supervision. So there'll be a time it slows down. Surely the manager would prefer the cashier maybe grabs a wet towel and goes and wipes the tables down. And
for all of our people who have worked in food services or anything close to it, you've heard that phrase: if you have time to lean, you have time to clean. Which I think anyone working in food service
giving me PTSD. I think I had forgotten that. But
there you go. There's the principal agent problem, right? You should be cleaning, not resting.
Yep. And so certainly the client and a lawyer is a big one, but it's a pretty big problem. I mean, there's a pretty big problem here. And the question is, what types of incentives are needed to ensure that the agent does what the principal wants? And I actually teach the principal agent problem within game theory.
Okay.
And the idea, we don't go into too much of analytics on what to do, but the idea that there's a very major issue here with what's done, and ideas on managerial economics in terms of how does someone manage. Managerial economics is a little bit of a broader statement.
So you mentioned solutions. Maybe we should throw in a couple, at least in our examples.
Throw in more examples first before we get to solutions.
We can, yeah. So we could talk about why we're bringing this up now of all time.
Wait a moment, but I want to bring up another one that I think is pretty big, and I think it's often overlooked, but it leads to a huge debate within economics. So Milton Friedman, I would say those who vilify Milton Friedman will often vilify him for a particular statement in a particular op-ed in the New York Times. And do you know, by me saying that, do you know
As
what the
soon as you
statement
said
is
the
so that you
op-ed in
can
the New York
paraphrase?
Times, I remember something. I remember there's something that he did in the New York Times, and I'm blanking in the moment. Was this related to? This wasn't related to minimum wage.
No,
But there
no,
was
no.
somebody that was somebody else who had done an op-ed and
The title of the title of the op-ed, the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits.
okay.
That's the title. And it's probably why he is singly, those who try to vilify will often point to this to say, oh, that's just horrible. However, I want you to think about a public company and the principal agent problem. A CEO is the agent. The principal is the board and the shareholders. If you own a stock in a company, you have hired the CEO to make you money so you can live a little richer, so you could retire a little sooner, right? You have hired the CEO is your agent. Should the CEO be advocating for their own social interests? Like,
Mhm.
or should they be making money? And that's a controversial one.
Well, and I would
But
say, especially given what's going on, what the past 5 years or so, that has taken a renewed interest in the idea that businesses are doing all sorts of just different social agendas.
yeah, yeah.
And then it comes back to this that it's essentially something we've been fighting about for 50 years.
Yep, yep. But that's very much, I think, a principal agent problem, in the sense that if a CEO does something that maybe isn't really tied to profits, I mean, a CEO's time is stunningly valuable,
Hmm.
but they might get some nice press if they're doing something that's a particular social action. And I say this, and the social action could be on the left, it could be on the right politically, right? It could be either way if you're taking a particular action. Um, I would make the argument, and I would make an argument that the CEO, if they are taking these actions and it's not maximizing profits, you've run into a principal agent problem here, where the CEO isn't doing it. That's an example I think others might debate on, right? And say, hey, there's other stakeholders, and they should be listening to the other stakeholders, and that's a big debate though within
Yep.
economics. But I think CEOs and what they do, the board hires them on behalf of the shareholders in public companies and CEOs. That's a huge principal agent type issue.
Yeah.
So that's one more example. Do we want to get into solutions first, or do we want to get into the timely one?
Let's talk about solutions just briefly, because I think if we give the timely example, then we can sort of wrap it all together. We can talk about how that one
Sure.
is a principal agent problem, some of the solutions maybe that are trying to come out of it. Maybe it'll be really interesting. Maybe we can try to predict the future, because
Yeah.
economists do that so well of what's going on. So I'll give you I'll say maybe I should have said this as like a very obvious easy one. That another example of a principal agent problem, as one more last one, is like a football player's agent. Like there's actual like agents that exist, and I think we know about agents in that sort of agency space. Um, but then so professional sports, right, is a really
Yep.
good
Yep.
example. You could think about parents raising their kids in the sense of doing what they think is in the best interest of somebody else. And so like exactly what we started with, there are so many great examples. I probably should be mentioning it at least. And now you got me thinking about what I'm gonna do in the fall. Is that maybe I should reconsider some of these to think about. I don't talk about asymmetric information, and I like that stuff's fascinating. Like I think I probably should. I just don't.
Well, it's not like you're doing nothing though,
I'm
right?
not doing that right.
There's
There's
trade-offs,
there's
and
scarcity and trade-offs and
yeah, yeah,
opportunity costs, right?
yeah.
I have to give something up, and so I'm sitting here thinking, where would I squeeze this in? There, I
And also, I teach this. Remember, it's been game theory I've been teaching for a few
yeah,
years now, so it's
yeah. No, I'm thinking of like, what would I give up? And like, I've got some stuff at the end that I don't necessarily love, but like, I do like it. So I have a section on the end of my course is on topics of economics. So I do price discrimination, game theory, and then I talk about behavioral and consumer choice. So those are sort of my four last chapters. I don't love sequential games. They're fine. Simultaneous games are way more fun. But maybe I could squeeze out sequential games and squeeze in some asymmetric information, principal agent problem, those sorts of fun things. So solutions. How do we fix the problem of people not representing the other people the way they should?
yeah. Well, I mean, one thing is to try to set up, if you're dealing with a hiring situation, to try to set up the incentives in a way where all of a sudden the incentives of the agent are more closely aligned with the incentives of the principal. So
Do you want-
so CEOs,
Mhm.
for example, often will have stock options as
Yep.
part of the deal. So if they can spend their extra effort trying to make the company more profitable to increase the share price, by
Mhm.
increasing the share price, those options become much more valuable and they make a lot more money.